Science is fun, as you will see. Let's do some learning with Dr. D. So all life needs certain kind of molecules and energy in order to live, in order to reproduce, to grow, to repair themselves. This lizard here, those trees behind me, we all need these kind of things in our lives. So we get them from eating. So the best place to go look for this is in the kitchen. So in the kitchen here, we're going to look for molecules that serve both as energy and as building blocks. We call them sugars. So you'll recall that we use certain colors in our models, like we use black for carbon, we use red for oxygen, and we use white for hydrogen. If you notice all of these carbons that are connected to each other and attached to each carbon is two H's and an O. Two H's and an O. Two H's and an O. That's a water molecule, and a water molecule hooked to a carbon. These are hydrated carbons, carbohydrate. Now, there's a whole bunch of different kinds of sugars, but we're going to focus just on three main kinds: the monosaccharide, the disaccharide, and the polysaccharide. So we can think of one molecule of sugar as being a link in a chain. You can have one, or two, or three, or four, or 1,000. Just like in a regular chain, where you could have one link, two links, three links, or many, many links. So a kind of food in your kitchen that's filled with these single links, these monosaccharides, is honey. So bees don't drink honey out of flowers. They remove a nectar that's filled with a disaccharide called sucrose. And in their stomach, it's broken down by enzymes into fructose and glucose. And it gets dehydrated, and then they regurgitate it into their hive to help feed their babies. Yes, honey is bee barf. High fructose corn syrup. There's something very strange about high fructose corn syrup. So here we have a drawing of a molecule of glucose and a molecule of fructose. They're shown stretched out rather than in their ring structures, but when these two are joined together in two rings, it's called sucrose, or table sugar. And that's what bees tend to drink out of flowers in the form of nectar, and the bees break apart this sucrose molecule into these two components. And it tastes very sweet to us. Corn starch is just a long chain of glucose molecules, no fructose. But what we do is we use enzymes to break down the starch into its glucose molecules, and then we treat it to turn it into fructose. It's an unnatural process. And fructose, although it's really sweet and it is a natural sugar, our bodies aren't really evolved to consume huge amounts of it. And that's a problem when we use it as a sweetener in our beverages and in our foods. A lot of plants make these two-link sugars called disaccharides. And you can find them in things like table sugar, also known as sucrose, maple syrup.
Sugar and syrup?
Yes.
Then yes! We elves try to stick to the four main food groups: candy, candy canes, candy corns, and syrup.
Carrots, citrus like grapefruit, bananas, apples, onions, sweet peppers. Animals make a version of this too. It's called lactose. We find that in milk. You can find this milk sugar called lactose in a lot of other things too, made of milk, like milk chocolate, yogurt, ice cream, and also they put it in a lot of other kind of foods. So we can see we have this 2-ring sugar over here called the lactose. It consists of 1 ring here and 1 ring here, and they're joined together right here. We need an enzyme to cut these in half, and this enzyme is called lactase. Lactase will give us galactose and glucose, and our bodies will absorb these. The problem arises is when you do not have lactase. The lactose goes all the way through your intestines into your colon, and the bacteria there start to eat it, and it causes you to get a lot of gas built up from the bacteria eating this lactose, and it becomes very uncomfortable. This is Sriracha and Cookie. Cookie is pregnant, and so that means she's going to be making milk for her babies. That's what mammals do. They produce milk, and this milk will have lactose in it, and the milk is very similar to human milk. That's why we get to drink it. These kind of goats have descended from goats in Turkey from 6500 BC and from about 2500 BC in Iran. So what we see in this picture here is that people around the world aren't equal in their ability to eat lactose as adults. Remember, we stop drinking milk when we're just babies, and our bodies, we inactivate the gene, the part that creates the enzyme lactase in order to eat milk. But some peoples in the world can still do this. We'll notice here that in Northern Europe, it's very common to be able to eat milk or drink milk all the way up through adulthood. And the same thing all through the north up here. The closer you are to the equator, the less likely you are to be able to process milk. And we believe this has something to do with, over the last 8,000 years, that this mutation has become common in places where milk can be used as a food all year round. It doesn't go bad, doesn't spoil where it's cold. And places where milk doesn't last very long, where it goes sour very quickly, we don't see milk as being an alternative food source for adults. We do know that somewhere about 8,000 years ago in Turkey is where people started using animal milk on a regular basis, and that's the first evidence of this mutation showing up, where humans can be adults and drink milk without getting sick.
The third kind of sugar we're going to look at is called polysaccharides. It's when a lot of sugars get into really long chains. And some creatures use these for building materials. Sometimes they use it for energy storage. For instance, this tree here, it's made up of a sugar called cellulose. These mushrooms here, they're made up of a sugar called chitin. The same chitin is found in the shells of crabs and lobsters, in the numerous mosquitoes that are currently eating me right now.
We cannot digest these. Plants use the really long molecule called cellulose for building themselves, but in order to have energy stores in their bodies, they use one called starch. They keep it in their roots, in their leaves, in their seeds, and then we eat them. Examples of starch include bread, spaghetti, oatmeal, rice. Here comes the bride. Cornstarch. Here's a hint. It's right in the name. So think of things made out of corn flour or wheat flour, things made out of potatoes. Starch, starch, starch. It's just long, long chains of sugars plants use to store their energy. We eat them, and we get to use that energy from them. Animals store really long chains of carbohydrates in their liver and in their muscles. It's called glycogen.
Yes? Hello, can we have your liver? What? Your liver. It's a large glandular organ in your abdomen.
Just because it's sweet doesn't mean that it is a carbohydrate or a sugar molecule. This is stevia. It comes out of plants, and it is not a sugar molecule, but it's 200 or 300 times sweeter than table sugar. This is aspartame. This is 200 or 300 times sweeter than table sugar, and it is not a sugar. This is sucralose. This is up to 1,000 times sweeter than table sugar, but it is not a sugar. And lastly, there's a molecule called saccharin that's 200 or 300 times sweeter than regular table sugar, but it is not sugar. So sweet does not necessarily mean carbohydrate. So here's an experiment you can do at home. If you remember, bread is full of starch. Now, starch isn't very sweet, but we have in our saliva an enzyme that breaks down starch into smaller and smaller sugars, and we can taste the sweetness of those. So you put a piece of bread in your mouth, and you chew, and you chew, and you chew, and the longer you chew without swallowing, the sweeter and sweeter the bread should become.
Okay, let's wrap things up. Monosaccharides are building blocks for carbohydrates. The major groups of carbohydrates that we looked at were the monosaccharides, the disaccharides, and the polysaccharides. And carbohydrates serve multiple functions in organisms, such as structural or energy. Different creatures use different sugars. For example, animals use glycogen to store energy, plants use starch to store energy. And plants are the main source of carbohydrates, developing it through photosynthesis. And carbohydrates can be broken down for new building blocks, or for energy for the organism. Please review these vocabulary words that we will be looking at in class.